John had a close-knit group of friends since childhood, and they did everything together. They were like family, and John felt like he could tell them anything. But something strange started happening, and John couldn't explain it. One by one, John's friends began to disappear, and nobody else seemed to notice. John tried to bring it up with their families and other friends, but they all thought he was crazy. "Your friends are still around," they would say. "You must have just missed them." John felt like he was losing his mind. He knew his friends were gone, and he couldn't understand why nobody else seemed to care. He started to become paranoid, thinking that maybe someone was targeting his group of friends. He tried to warn his friends that they were in danger, but they didn't seem to believe him. As the disappearances continued, John became more and more desperate. He started to investigate on his own, trying to find any clues about what was happening. But every lead he followed led to a dead end. One night, John was walking home from a late-night shift at work when he saw something that made his blood run cold. One of his missing friends was standing on the sidewalk, looking dazed and confused. John ran up to him, relieved to see him alive. But then, something strange happened. John's friend didn't seem to recognize him. He had no memory of their friendship or anything that had happened before he disappeared. John was heartbroken and confused, but he knew he had to keep looking for answers. Finally, John stumbled upon a secret organization that had been experimenting with memory-erasing technology. They had been targeting John's group of friends, using them as guinea pigs in their twisted experiments. They wanted to see if they could erase memories and manipulate people without anyone noticing. John was horrified, and he knew he had to stop them. He contacted the authorities, and together they raided the organization's headquarters. They found evidence of the experiments and put an end to it once and for all. But John's relief was short-lived. He soon discovered that the organization had implanted a device in his brain, and he was the only one who could see his friends disappearing. It was all a sick and twisted game, and John was the only player. John was left alone, knowing that his friends were gone forever, and he could never escape the twisted reality that had been forced upon him. It all started as I was reading the latest bestseller horror novel. I couldn't help but feel like the story was familiar, like I had experienced it before. The more I read, the more the feeling intensified until suddenly, I realized that I was a character in the book. I frantically flipped through the pages, looking for any mention of my name. And there it was. My name, my description, my life. Everything about me was written in detail. I couldn't believe it. How was this possible? I was living my life, not a character in a book. As I continued reading, I realized that the plot was getting darker and more twisted. The character based on me was going through a nightmare, and I couldn't help but feel like I was living it too. I tried to put the book down, but I couldn't. It was like an invisible force was keeping it in my hands. Suddenly, I heard a whisper behind me. "You shouldn't have read the book," the voice said. I turned around, but there was no one there. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered on. As I continued reading, I noticed that the story was starting to change. My character was no longer just a victim. He was becoming the villain. The more I read, the more I realized that I was no longer just reading the book. I was living it. I tried to escape, but the book was always there, waiting for me. The story was consuming me, and I was becoming the monster that I had been reading about. I was scared, but I couldn't stop. I was trapped in the pages, and the only way out was to finish the book. As I read the final chapter, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. I had made it to the end, and I could finally put the book down. But as I closed the book, I noticed something strange. The book had no author's name, no publisher, no copyright information. Suddenly, I realized the truth. I wasn't a character in a book. I was the book. And whoever read me was trapped in my world, just like I was trapped in theirs. The grandfather clock had been in the family for generations. It had a rich, deep sound that echoed through the house, reminding everyone that time was always moving forward. But one day, strange things started happening. The clock began to speak. At first, it was just a few words, barely audible. But as the days went on, the voice became louder and more persistent. The family tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just their imagination. but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The clock's voice grew louder and clearer each day until finally it spoke in full sentences. The voice was deep and ominous, and it always seemed to be watching them. The family tried to get rid of the clock, but it refused to budge. It was almost as if it was alive. One night, the clock's voice woke them up in the middle of the night. It was louder than ever before, and it sounded angry. The family rushed to the clock and tried to silence it, but it wouldn't stop. Suddenly, the clock's hands began to spin wildly, and a blinding light filled the room. When the light faded, the family realized that they were no longer in their house. They were in a dark, twisted version of their home, filled with strange creatures and terrifying sights. The clock's voice echoed through the halls, taunting them. The family tried to escape, but they couldn't find a way out. The clock's voice grew louder and more sinister with each passing moment, and it seemed like it was the only thing that was keeping them there. Days turned into weeks, and the family became more and more desperate. They knew that they were trapped in some sort of nightmare, and the clock was the key to their escape. But they couldn't figure out how to silence it. Finally, one night, the clock's voice spoke to them in a different tone. It wasn't angry or taunting, but it was almost sad. It told them that they had to make a sacrifice if they wanted to escape. They had to offer up something they loved. The family hesitated, but they knew that they had no other choice. They each offered up something that was dear to them, and the clock's voice grew softer and softer with each sacrifice. And then, suddenly, the clock's voice was gone. The family found themselves back in their own home, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds that they had missed so much. But they couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. And then they noticed that the clock was gone. In its place, there was a note. The note simply read, "Thank you for your sacrifice. I will cherish it always."